Good afternoon, students, ladies and gentlemen. Asian Law College, under the Asian Education Group, during this ALC Orientation Week, brings to you from our legal lecture series yet another eminent personality in conversation. The Legal Lecture Series is an initiative of the Asian Education Group which aims at developing a successful legal career which is built on having the right skills. For this, AG LLS invites professionals from the upper echelons of the legal arena and requests them to share their experiences, which inspire and guide the students towards innovative thinking, attention to detail, perseverance, and attributes for becoming effective and skilled legal professionals. The few speakers invited under this program include the late Sri Pranab Mukherjee, ex-President of India, the Honorable Justice K.G. Balakrishnan, former CJI of India, Honorable Justice Deepak Mishra, former CJI of India, Sri K.T.S. Tulsi, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court of India, the Honorable Justice B.P. Singh, former Judge, Supreme Court of India, Honorable Justice A.K. Sikri, former Judge, Supreme Court of India, Sri Rajiv Mohan, Public Prosecutor, Nirbhaya case, Sri Mayank Pratap Singh, the youngest Judge of India, Dr. Kiran Bedi, ex-IPS officer and the current Lieutenant Governor of Puducherry, General Bikram Singh, former Chief of the Army Staff, Ms. Lakshmi Agarwal, the acid attack survivor, Mr. Shiv Khera, motivational speaker, Mr. Rene Desoignies, CEO, Oxford Institute of Body Language, United Kingdom. Also, this needs mentioning here, the Animal Law Cell at ALC has been incorporated into the system to sensitize students about animal rights and animal welfare. Its mission running on the lines that a real inclusive society would be the one which nurtures not only the diversity amongst human beings, but one which concerns itself with the cause of living beings. On behalf of Asian Education Group, I welcome you all to this webinar, A Lawyer Without Fear and Favor, in conversation with the dynamic, dauntless, indomitable Ms. Karuna Nundy, the international human rights lawyer, United Nations advocate, and at the Supreme Court of India. Ms. Karuna Nundy is a renowned lawyer at the Supreme Court of India, and the focus of her work is on constitutional law, commercial litigation and arbitration, media law, and legal policy. She was included by an Economic Times jury in a list of corporate India's fastest rising women leaders, which cited her as being famous in the corporate world for her expertise in commercial law. She has played a significant role in drafting the anti-rape bill after the 2012 Delhi gang rape. In 2019, the UK Foreign Office appointed the lawyer to a new panel of experts to develop the legal frameworks for protecting the freedom of the media across the globe. She's received a degree in economics from the St. Stephen's College, Delhi University. After a short stint as a TV journalist, she studied law at Cambridge University and later pursued LLM from the Columbia University, New York. Ms. Nundy has worked as a lawyer in the United Nations. Honorable Speaker for today, Ms. Karuna Nundy, we are delighted to welcome you to this platform. The students are eagerly waiting to listen to you. I hand over this session to you.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. So I've been asked to speak a little bit about my journey in the law. And thinking back, I think that law is a lot like love. You know it when you see it. Either you fall for it hard or you don't. And once you are in the thick of it, what it really requires is hard work, faith, and perseverance. Now, I think some of you may know that when I started out, I wasn't at all sure what I wanted to do. What I was clear about is that I needed to find a vocation, something that felt like a calling. Partly because I think that we spend so much of ourselves in our work, not just our time, but also our energies, our mind, and in the best kind of work, I think also our hearts. Um, and so I did a whole bunch of different things first. As ma'am just mentioned, my first degree was in economics. I considered being a development economist, becoming a development economist. But for me personally, I felt that while it's very important and it brings if you do it right, you can bring huge numbers of people out of poverty. You can contribute to the growth of the country, which is the people of this country, and do something that is fundamentally important to people's lives. The trouble is, for me, that I felt that the impact was not direct enough. Um, and that you always, the way we studied it in any way, you always had to work within constraints that were ceteris paribus, which is the Latin for all other things remaining equal, whereas of course we know that all other things don't remain equal. Right? So it's always a guessing game. Um, I then graduated and I worked for a year and a half as a TV journalist, which was very interesting and fun and taught me, I think, that you have to get things done. You have to get things done and how to get things done. And when you have a particular task, you have to use your ingenuity, you have to use various resources to achieve the goal. Because, and every day was a new goal because there was a new story every day. What I realized during that time, though, is that the investigative stories I did, one with regard to women in a village called Alipur that were being tested by the ICMR for whether their dysplasias would become zero stage cancer or not. And such a study was being done without telling these people that their cancer could be prevented, right? And this story resulted in a change in the ICMR ethics structure and the establishment of an ethical committee, which was, I think, one of the most satisfying things for me. So I realized through this and through a couple of other stories that what I was most invested in really was impact. And I think if that's what you want to do, then reporting, just reporting on the news, is a step away from it. Though of course journalism has become different right now, and I don't think in a positive direction. Um, so I then went to law school. I applied to film school, journalism, and law school came through first. The Cambridge admission cycle is earlier than the United States. I thought it was going to be miserable. England is rainy. It's the food wasn't, so I didn't expect the food to be very good. It wasn't at the time. And I expected to grit my teeth and bear it, but I thought that, look, even if I want to become a filmmaker or something afterwards, then at least I'll have a degree to fall back on. But I walked into class my first day, and we had a torts professor who was funny and brilliant and about 7 months pregnant. And she just really literally lit up my mind. And I found that I was thinking in a way that I never had before and excited about these ideas in a way that I had never thought possible. That felt like love. That felt like really like falling in love. And not just that professor, not just Janet O'Sullivan, but also, Graham Virgo, also other professors. Now, after a 3-year law degree, I then I then again wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, applied to various different things, and I was admitted to I was, awarded a fellowship with Columbia University for an LLM, which sounded exciting. And so I took it up and used the time because I'd just done a law degree and I was interested in the academic aspect of it, but they also had a clinical program. Clinical program is a program where you work with various, you know, whether it's a judge or whether it's a case or whether it's a particular lawyer. And I took the opportunity to work with the UN for the first semester while I was doing my LLM. And the second semester, I clerked for Judge Gabrielle Kirk Mcdonnell, who was the former head of the ICTY, which is the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. And the first experience was interesting. It was all right. But the second experience was incredibly valuable because this was actually a people's tribunal. There wasn't a real justice had not happened. This was not a UN constituted tribunal, but she had lent her name and she was heading the tribunal anyway because real justice had not happened for the comfort women of Korea and Southeast Asia that had been sexually enslaved by the Japanese army during World War II. So, therefore, a panel was set up to hear their testimony because many of them were at the time, dying. They were quite old. To hear their testimony and to apply the law to a robust judgment that would stand up to legal scrutiny. I found that that was a very interesting experience because at the time, I thought, I wonder how valuable this is because where's the legal impact? Is anyone going to be punished? And the thing I realized is that law is a number of different things. It's not just about getting that judgment and sending someone to jail. It's not just about winning that big corporate case and winning a company money. It is also about the smaller things. It's about, for example, in this case, having these women who had suffered so much finding voice and being told by a panel that was, essentially interchangeable with international criminal panel, that what happened to them was a war crime and a crime against humanity. To have that catharsis, to have the experience being seen was, and to for me to be present and to understand what these people can go through and to contribute to that very different sense of justice was interesting and quite valuable. I then worked for the UN, and for those of you who were are interested in that, I worked with UNICEF at the time, and I was a sort of a global advocacy officer. Um, the thing is that with the UN, it's a large behemoth, and it can be interesting. There are parts of it that are very interesting, and there are parts of it that are not as effective. You just have to sort of investigate which bits are interesting and which are not. It's important to remember that it's not like a domestic legal system. And because in a domestic legal system, you go to court, there is a judgment, 9 times out of 10, it'll be implemented, right? Whereas in the UN, very often you will be doing policy work, legal policy work. You can do various sorts of things, of course, but if you're doing legal policy work, then the government may take up particular aspects of it, may not. And as in any policy work, it may be diluted in its implementation. It may have some impact, it may not. However, there is a sort of large canvas because if you're working at the country level, it's different. But if you're working if you're working at the country level, you're working with a government, and much of the work happens through the government. But if you're working at the larger international level, then the canvas is wide, and you're looking at a number of different countries. There are, of course, the sort of litigation arms, the sort of work at the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague, for example, or the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and the work they do is important. But at the same time, there aren't a lot of cases that make it to trial, and there aren't a lot of or arbitration, but there aren't a lot of cases also that have the sort of world and the various parties come together for a investment and faith nowadays in these multilateral bodies. Now, I truly believe that multilateral bodies are extremely important and they are the way forward, but we have to recognize that the world today is heading towards the sovereignty of individual nations, and the faith in multilateral bodies is not high, in part because I think the right wings are rising across in various different countries in the world. Of course, these things change. And some of you will be in your first year, and by the time you graduate, this might have changed. So it's just something to keep in mind for now. I was sitting in a tall building, and at the time thinking, well, I was reading an article actually, and I was quite enjoying my work, making lots of money. In the beginning, I was quite impressed with myself. um, but at some point, I remember reading an article actually by Harsh Mandar, and he was talking about the Gujarat riots. And I remember thinking, well, what am I doing here? Surely I should be home, contributing not just to the constitutional and human rights work that's going on in India, but in addition, also working with everybody else who's working on it here to strengthen the legal system, whether it's in income tax cases. I have a big fat, you can't see them, but well, I have, this is the exciting book I have in front of me right now. This is the case I'm working on. It's an income tax case. But also, the other cases, because India at the moment, at the last time I checked, was 182 in terms of enforcement of contracts. And let's be clear that the ease of doing business is significant to the growth of the country, right? And the fixing of the legal system, making sure that cases we get swift, certain justice is important for everybody. It's important for rape survivors, it's important for people who are embroiled in property disputes, and it is important for um, companies facing income tax litigation, right? Um, and I didn't burn my bridges. I had a job with Clifford Chance at the time, and I asked them to defer it. I told my colleagues at the UN that I might be back in a year or two, and I moved back. I knew litigation was going to be tough, but I didn't foresee how very interesting and how very fun it was going to be. And it has been consistently all those things. Um, it is also true that in this country in particular, when you are in litigation, you one of the top qualities that you need is perseverance. Why? Because each case takes a very long time. You may be fully ready for your case, and from the beginning, um, I have always been, every time I've had a hearing, I have been 100% ready with my case, because you never know what's going to happen. Your case could be, the other side could come up with something, the judge could be in a particular mood, and they could dismiss your case if you're not ready on that day. In fact, I have had other people's cases dismissed on this very basis. However, very often you will be ready and you will have everything together. You will have your notes together. You will have, stayed up all night maybe looking at new judgments. And the matter will be adjourned. It's a very common thing that happens in our profession. So, having perseverance, having resilience is really important. One thing that has taught me, has inculcated in me a certain amount of perseverance and continues to, is the Bhopal cases. For those of you who are not aware of what happened in 1984, and the intervening night between the 2nd and the 3rd of December, the Union Carbide plant in Bhopal let out methyl isocyanate. They say by accident, we say by criminal negligence, because they were trying to cut down on costs and save money. Significantly because Indian lives don't matter as much as other lives. There were other jurisdictions they could have gone to, but they came here. It was easier in a regulatory, it was an easier regulatory environment, and it was cheaper. And the gas was released, killing a huge number of people, killing at least 20,000 people, and permanently damaging the lives of more than 5 lakhs. 5 lakh people. But in addition, what happened was that they dumped the toxic waste during the normal operation of the plant where they were manufacturing a pesticide. And they dumped the toxic waste into these ditches, basically. And the toxic waste leaked into the groundwater. We have memos that we filed in court that demonstrate that the toxic waste that was leaking into the groundwater killed 100% of the fish that were put in this water for a particular time. 100%, all the fish died. Where is this memo from? This memo is an internal memo of Union Carbide. So they knew that this was happening and they didn't do anything about this. And this is one of the lesser known fallouts of Bhopal. Have we got justice in these cases? We have got very, very limited justice. Now, when I first got the case, one of the most important things to me was to make sure that safe water was being provided to these people. It was amazing to me that they were still not drinking safe water. And that is something that we have largely managed to do. It was a huge fight because the various Madhya Pradesh governments of various colors, all different political parties, kept coming to court and kept denying that this was happening at all, right? Anyway, um, the big task, of course, is corporate accountability. And here we see that there is a huge, and not just in this country, but across the world, but in this country and with most of the political parties, if not all, there's a huge corporate government nexus where there's funding that happens from the big corporations to governments now through electoral bonds, where it's completely opaque. We don't know which companies are giving money to political parties to fight their elections, and so therefore we can't tell where the quid pro quo is. We do know that environmental norms are being taken down. We do know that captive coal mines, for example, are being supplied in a way that they shouldn't. Um, but this lack of transparency is a disaster, and I think it's one of the hugely important cases, one of the most important cases before the Supreme Court today. But it hasn't been heard. So this case and what we are up against um, has taught me perseverance, continues to teach me perseverance, because where such significant justice is involved, you cannot give up. The people from Bhopal teach me perseverance, because the fact that they continue to seek justice from our constitutional democracy is a big learning in itself. Um, I would like to open this up to questions. So I could go on longer, but I would like to open this up to questions, and I would like to hear what you have to say and to answer your questions. So we'll break for now.
Okay, so that's given us quite an understanding about you, Ms. Karuna. I have a collection of questions here from the students, and I'm beginning with the first one. This boy wants to know from you, can we attribute your journey as a Supreme Court lawyer to the thought of bringing about a change and gaining the power to fix things most effectively for the benefit of society and the nation as a whole?
I think that's a huge part of it. And you've read me right. I think that's a very, very big part of it. But also, I very much enjoy the process of the law. I I enjoy finding the new idea. I enjoy the flow that you get into when you're doing the hard work, because that's what you're doing most of the time. There was a meme going around with a picture of me on it on one side, kind of gazing into the distance with the Supreme Court in the background, and there was the other half of the picture was a lawyer studying under a pile of papers and looking a bit depressed. Now the thing is that most of life is actually surrounded by a pile of papers, as my desk is right now. And if you don't enjoy that aspect, if you don't enjoy kind of really getting to the bottom of it, reading every single page, because you have to read every single page, because it could be that page that you miss that comes and bites you later, right? Because the judge happens to have read it, even if the other side isn't very competent. Um, that is important. And I think you've got to enjoy that aspect as well. And the third thing really is that it's always been extremely important for me to have a viable, I to support myself financially, and not just support myself and my family financially. And I think that is something that is not discussed enough, because and particularly for and by women. Money is not supposed to be something you talk about. It's supposed to be something that's a little bit dirty. At the same time, success is sort of pegged to that. So I think there's a complicated thing around that. Um, but I think that is also important. And one of the things that I would say to all of you is that you need to figure out a business model to your practice, even if you're pretty much only going to do human rights and constitutional work, because you have to run an office, you have to pay juniors, you have to run a family, you have to, pay electricity bills, etc. Right? And one thing that this program might teach you, but that traditional law schools don't, and they don't address it at all, is that in litigation, one of the skills that you need starting out is entrepreneurial, actually. Well, in the beginning, you're probably going to work with someone and be somebody's colleague. Junior is what they say in frequently. But when you start out your own practice, there's an entrepreneurial aspect that's also going to come into it.
You're seen as an inspiration by many women. We would like to know who are the women who've changed or impacted your life?
A huge number, actually. There was this judge, Gabrielle Kirk Mcdonnell, the judge that I clerked for, and she was incredible. She had been a litigator for the NAACP, which is sort of Black rights, African American rights organization, and then she became a federal judge in the United States before she went to the ICTY. And she was brilliant, and she was just, and she carried her inspiration with her for the work that she did, even at the age of, I don't know how old she was then. You know, when you're very young, everyone seems impossibly old. She seemed, I mean, I think she was possibly 65 or something like that, but she carried her inspiration up to that point. And I think that was something that was quite important to me. Justice Ruma Pal, who was on the Supreme Court um, for a few years in my early years, and the fact that she was brilliant too, actually. And the fact that she was even there, I think, gave a lot of us younger lawyers a major boost, not just in terms of how we saw ourselves potentially in the future, but also how other people saw us. My mother, who passed away some years ago, passed away in 2014, but she founded and built up an organization called ADI, which is used to be the Spastic Society. And there was nothing else serving children with cerebral palsy in northern India, and she managed to build up a really, really important institution, mainstream the sort of disabled students' education into so-called normal schools. So there was diversity in these schools, and so they didn't feel closeted away in one space. So that there was a teachers training program they had recognized by Delhi University. She never compromised on standards. There were people who came and thought they were doing charity and thought, it's an NGO, I'll volunteer for a bit. And there was absolutely no question of it. I mean, she just absolutely worked very, very hard, and she had the highest standards possible. But she also, I think, charted her own path in a sense. And I think that's important, to listen to your own voice and ignore the glass ceilings where possible, break them where you have to, get the help you need, and do what you have to do.
Probably she was the one who left the most indelible impact on you because that's what made you so dauntless and so bold, believing in yourself.
I
Yes.
think there's a magic in boldness. Everyone has fear, especially today. And if we're not going to live, if we're not going to truly live, there's no point in existing, I think.
Very true. You really have a way with words, Miss Karuna. I must say that. They say that you are one of the most social media savvy lawyers. How do you see social media as a tool for communicating your opinion with people at large and addressing or sharing your opinion on important issues through the various platforms of social media?
I see my role as a lawyer and a constitutionalist, somebody who sort of believes in the constitutional structure of our democracy and uh, is invested in furthering that. I see my role not just in court, well, though more significantly in court, but also in working to bring constitutionalism to our larger communities. And I think there are various, it's something that I think about a lot, and it's something that I think about during my time off. And so it's something that I engage um, on social media as well as sort of larger, lectures and writing and in other ways. We live in a deeply unequal society. The inequality stems from gender, but also very much from caste, as we saw in the Hathras case, very much also from religion, as is increasing more and more today, also from the difference between the richest person in the country who has made huge money during this pandemic and the face of the poorest person, as Gandhiji used to say, um, and the poorest child, where because child malnutrition and child wasting has been increasing in a dramatic way during this pandemic. And let's keep in mind that that time doesn't come back. So the inequalities are increasing. Now, I think engaging with that and dealing with that is significant. Um, and I think we all need to engage in that and engage with it deeply because while we may have a deep and visceral sense of what inequality means as women, for instance, or as those of you who are maybe young men without lawyers in the family, without an inherited practice, right? Without, or maybe you're from a small town. But we also must understand that that we can't stop at that. That, for example, for me, since I am have had the so-called upper caste privilege, I must deeply understand what has meant in the lives of women and men and others who have been deemed to be so-called lower caste and the huge injustices that have happened in those lives. Um, and so I find that these conversations are hugely facilitated by social media because there's a two-way process very often that happens, and you learn as well as you speak. And also, frankly, I find it relaxing. So it's quite easy. It's nice. It's easy for me because I do it during breaks from work, and I like engaging. So
Let's get Sumit on board. He's ready with his question. Sumit, are you there?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Yes, please put your question.
Good evening, ma'am.
hello, Suman.
Hello, ma'am. My question is, what is legal framework in India to help women to do better in corporate sector?
We already have a legal framework to some extent. Now, that legal framework speaks of protecting the company, because let's be clear that the interest of the women from not being sexually harassed is very much in the interest of company from sexual harassment. There are now provisions of having a small number of women directors on each board, But I think in corporate India, one thing that is hugely required is equality legislation. And it's not just in corporate India, it's across the board, it's across the country. And I think that equality and non-discrimination legislation that a lot of countries have is something that we very fundamentally need. Because the thing is that if somebody sexually harasses someone, says, "Hey, baby," for example, right? Then that is something that can go to the internal complaints committee. It's also actionable under Section 509. It's also actionable under Section 354A of the IPC, right? At the same time, if somebody's shouting at someone and saying that, "Look, you're absolutely useless because you're a woman," then there's nowhere that that can go. So I think that there are these kinds of discriminations are not serving corporate India. Um, because what they are doing is that they are blinding companies to the value of that these women who are being discriminated against, and that's pretty much everyone at some stage of their lives, right? It's blinding people to the value that these people can bring. So we actually create policies. So I and my chamber, we work on policies that serve, you know, that are basically anti-sexual prevention of sexual harassment policies and anti-sexual harassment policies. But you can also, some companies have also expanded these policies to become non-discrimination policies. And I think that has been quite useful for them, because you also workshops come with it, and there's a transformational aspect that happens for people who work in those companies when they understand what these policies can do, and not just for the women but for the men as well. Because be clear that feminism boxes men in to a very significant I mean, I beg your pardon, sexism and misogyny boxes men in to a very significant extent, right? It makes men um, forced to be tough, forced to be the main breadwinner, forced to do particular kinds of jobs, not engage with their softer sides as much, not engage with their lighter sides as much, or in a very particular way. But also, it boxes men, I think, to a certain extent into being, it encourages men to be oppressors, you know? And it takes courage, I think, to step out of that and say, listen, I'm not going to make that stupid sexist joke. You may find, and it may not be particularly cool, but actually, you're the one, you are the people who are not going to benefit in the long run, and just, in your personhoods. So I'm going to step away from that. So I think feminism has huge benefits for us all, including corporate India.
Okay, so this question says, can you please share your experience being a lawyer at the United Nations? Any incident that you'd like to share with us?
I just spoke about working at the UN. I was at one point in about, I think it was in 2000, and anyway, I was at one point doing a workshop with government officials in the Maldives, and they're richer than us, they're better off than us, and they're extremely competent. And they had a new constitution, and we were doing a workshop on how to make that a reality and how to sort of really bring that home. And there was a sort of curtsy juice that was organized with the president at the time. And their constitution allows people from other parts of the world to become judges. Um, and the president at the time, he said that, we'd had a long conversation, said that, would you like to be are you Muslim? And I said, no. He said, oh, that's a pity, because I'm looking for a Supreme Court judge. That's quite young. And and of course I said, Mr. President, that might, with respect, suffer from a bit of a democratic deficit, but apparently they do this because they have some people from outside also. So that stood out. Which was very interesting working with the sort of Attorney General's office and the Supreme Court of the Maldives, because while it's a much smaller country, I think the population at the time was about 350,000. I'm literally, I think it was really small, if I'm remembering right. I don't hold me to that bit. Um, you find actually that there are kind of governance and legal governance difficulties wherever you go, and there are sort of things to grapple with.
So this one, this one says, can you name a few constitutional pitfalls which you experienced yourself while litigating at the Honorable Supreme Court?
I'm not sure what you mean by a constitutional pitfall. I think one thing that I'm realizing more and more is the value and the need for consistency in the law when real life and people's politics and has become so polarized, right? I think the sort of stare decisis, which is the doctrine of precedent, and rigorously following what has come before and distinguishing it in each particular case, and also following, textual interpretations of the law, I think have become much more important than they were before, because where you have where the polity is polarized, I think the law must be rigorous and predictable. And the difficulty of our constitution, the difficulty and the beauty of our constitution as it pertains to the Supreme Court, is that our Supreme Court is one of the widest jurisdictions, possibly the widest jurisdiction of any constitutional court in the world. Under Article 142, it can do complete justice in any case. Under Article 136, it can hear any order from any court. An interim order from a trial court, for example, has been known to go up to directly go to the Supreme Court and be decided. Now, of course, in the vast majority of cases, that's not going to happen, but it does happen sometimes. Also, it is a polyvocal court because there's a large number of benches. And so you have different benches saying different things. And in some cases, these get reconciled through larger benches. But I think the need, therefore, to rigorously follow precedent is much greater.
Do you feel the dissenting opinion of judges has played a major role in preserving our constitutional integrity and identity?
I think the person who asked this question knows what they're talking about, because it is well known that Justice D.Y. Chandrachud in the Puttaswamy case set right the problems of in our constitutional history that were thrown up by ADM Jabalpur, were thrown up by his father. Now, this wasn't a dissent, but uh, Justice H.R. Khanna is the great dissenting judge of the emergency. And I think that his dissent was taken and um, has been celebrated in a constitutional way that has set some of those some of the egregiousness, some of the legal egregiousness of that time right. Ruth Bader Ginsburg famously has had in more recent times been writing a large number of dissents because she was outnumbered by in the court. And dissents are on the court are incredibly important because not only Does it set out for that particular, that does not only does it set out in the constitutional history a hook on which to hang future judgments and future justice, if that is what justice merits, but in addition, it makes clear to the polity, to the citizenry, that the eyes and ears of the courts are not closed, that there isn't unanimity where a majority of opinion doesn't meet the requirements of a particular view of justice.
Uh, the press conference that was done by four sitting judges of the Supreme Court on January 12, 2018, was unprecedented in the history of the Supreme Court of India, and it was a major breakthrough in bringing to the public domain the manner in which the allocation of cases are being done within the Supreme Court. What do you have to say to this?
I refer you to my long interview with the Quint at the time. I think it was a very important press conference. And I don't say this lightly. I think that a press conference like that should only happen when things are very, very serious, and it should certainly not happen easily, right? I think things were very serious, and I think in some ways things are very serious. What I was speaking of in terms of predictability is what those judges were speaking of then, which is that the way in which cases are allocated is extremely important. That you can't allocate a particular case to a particular judge without transparency, because the Chief Justice is designated as master of the roster. Because not only must justice be done, but justice must be seen to be done. That is, I think, that's Caesar's wife principle that is incredibly important in the delivery of justice systems, because it's not like, how many battalions do you have is a question that is sometimes asked of people of actors in a situation where might is right. Our courts operate as much in a normative environment being an environment where we believe that what the courts are doing must be submitted to, whether we agree with them or not, right? So that's a big part of the way in which our courts function. And so I think that maintaining that, and that Caesar's wife principle, therefore, that the justice must be seen to be done, is very important. And it's difficult because very often people are not going to agree with your judgments. And so in that situation, strength of due process, transparency, predictability in allocation of cases, these are principles that are central.
Very nicely put. In the recent Hathras case, you expressed your views effectively through Twitter, and the nation found a concern in your tweets on the Hathras victim family being denied access to lawyers and to move freely. What is your opinion on the dying declaration being the sole basis for conviction of the accused?
I think it's really important to remember that whether it's a dying declaration or whether it's in another rape case where the fact of sexual intercourse has been established, and the victim's testimony, if she's alive, the live victim's testimony goes through a number of processes, right? It goes through cross-examination. It goes rigorous cross-examination. It goes through scrutiny by the judge, right? You, of course, look at surrounding circumstances, and there's nothing compelling to the contrary also, right? And even then, even with this legal principle our rape conviction rate is at about 27%. Well, it hovers between about 25% to 27% in the last few years, right? So it's not high. Keeping in mind, of course, that the vast majority of rapes, over 90% of the rapes that actually occur in the context of marriage, so it's husbands raping their wives, and that is legal. It's not legal, but there's a specific exception under Section 375 with regard to this. That if you are married to your rapist, the person who then rapes you, then that is not rape. With regard to a dying declaration can be the sole basis of conviction. It doesn't have to. So I think it's, that's important to keep in mind.
Can you please share a few memories and learnings being a law student at Cambridge and Columbia University?
I used to cycle everywhere, and that cycle like everybody else. That cycle was really wobbly, and I had a friend called Alan, who's a big barrister now in Mountain Chambers. And he used to walk with me, and he used to say like, "Karuna, you're going to kill us." Because I used to be distracted. I used to be waving my arms around while cycling and talking. It was great fun. It was really a lot of fun. It was lonely sometimes, being far from family and all that, but it was a lot of fun. It was a huge growth experience. I think intellectually, one big thing that it taught me was to step away from what was already written, what was already thought, considered, either by judges or in textbooks, and to consider what I thought. See, that's something that Oxford and Cambridge do particularly well because they have the supervision and the tutorial system respectively. The reverse, tutor doesn't matter. And you have these conversations with your professor, the expert in the field, sometimes globally, and you have 3 or 4 people, and then they ask you what you think. They don't ask you what the textbook says. They ask you what you think, and they ask you to reason your way through to what you think, and then they ask you questions on it, right? So that process of thought, it's got to be robust, and it's got to be thought through and prepared. And I think that was my most important learning from Cambridge. It was the most, and it gave me the most confidence because apparently it mattered what I thought, which didn't as much, I think, when one is here, right? Um, that's not fair. It doesn't as much in some traditional learnings in our universities, but I think our universities are changing, and then there are some wonderful law schools, and I expect that yours is one of them, where some of these pedagogical methods are coming in. But even where they are not coming in, I think it's important for law students to take their learning in their own hands and to say that, okay, look, this is what's there. What do I think? And then you take a walk around the room and you think about what you have read and you think about what you know, and a lot of ideas will by themselves then fall into place, and you yourself will then get, I think, more confidence about your own critique and your own view of the law that you are studying. Um, Columbia was Columbia was in a way much more competitive. Um, and in a sense, I think more rigorous because the students are older. It's a postgraduate degree. People are really very competitive. Um, Sometimes in a good way, it can be useful. And yeah, I enjoyed that too. But as I said, I was working during both semesters. But one of the memories that stands out was actually a bunch. I'm not doing it enough justice, but I did an internet and the law class, and with Eben Moglen. And we were exploring all sorts of, sort of very new, different ideas of where this Brave New World was going to go. And of course, Brave New World, for those of you who have read the Aldous Huxley book, it's not a coincidence that um, that phrase was used even at the time, because there is so much disinformation, there's so much fake news, there's so much um, inequality that's happening over the web. I mean, those of you who are interested, look at what Jack Dorsey was saying in the US yesterday, and look at what is being, and look at what Zuckerberg said, Mark Zuckerberg said. I think one of the interesting things that he spoke of was algorithmic transparency, which is a new, those of you who are interested in tech law, is a new sort of area that I think we must go into, algorithmic choice even. Yeah.
The SC verdict in Sushant Singh Rajput's death case being directed to CBI was addressed by you as a verdict which will open the floodgates to people to choose the police force they wish for, regardless of jurisdiction. Could you elaborate on your observation?
No easy questions here, huh, students? Um, I strongly disagree with that judgment. And the reason that I disagree with it is because what happened in that case is that there was a FIR that was registered in Bihar, whereas the actus reus, even if of course, it's now been said by the CBI that the young man was not murdered, but even had he been murdered, it was in Bombay, right? Now, the Mumbai police was seized of the matter. It's true that they were not pursuing a criminal investigation pursuant to an FIR, but they were seized of the matter. Now, normally what would be done in such a situation is that it would be treated as a zero FIR, and that FIR would be transferred to the investigation would be transferred to the Mumbai police, and the Mumbai police would look at the whole issue. Now, why is this important? Because it's criminal law 101 that the jurisdiction is of the place where the crime was committed, right? Um, Now, there can be other kind, like, in various places. So, for example, if you have a financial transaction and there's a fraud, right? And if the fraud happens online and it happens in various different places, there are various different states that will have jurisdiction. When it comes to criminal defamation and somebody says something that is then uploaded, various different courts and states have jurisdiction, which leads to forum shopping as well. But I think it's perfectly arguable that um, my reputation, say, was damaged in Silchar. And the people in Silchar have, I'm lowered in, my reputation has been lowered in their esteem, and therefore I should be able to go to Silchar. But in this case, according to me, my view is that there was no such thing. And I would urge all of you, in the interest of what I just spoke about, to look at what you think, to read that judgment. Quite apart from anything else, I think that judgment was non-jurisdictional, because it was passed it was given to the CBI in a transfer petition, right? Secondly, there were particular rules by which single judges were allocated particular cases, and I think those rules did not allow the judge to decide in the manner that the case was decided. Because the single judge phenomenon in these sorts of cases is relatively new in this round, in the current Supreme Court. As I said, I think it also opens the floodgates, because there was another case that was, I think it was against Arnab Goswami, where there were FIRs filed in Mumbai, and then we hear that an FIR has also been filed in UP, right? And that UP has decided to file that case, has decided to transfer the case to the CBI, and thereby politicizing this whole process in a massive way, politicizing criminal jurisdiction in a massive way. The CBI, we already know, has been called a cage parrot by the Supreme Court. So I think that's a trend that we need to move away from instead of towards. And this is why I disagree with this particular judgment.
So we're coming to the close of the webinar, and this last bit, you're often known as a lawyer without fear or favor. And on the same line, would request you to tender some piece of career advice to our young students of law who are with us today in this webinar.
Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is doing what you think is right, even if you are scared. Let's first kill all the lawyers is a phrase that is often cited from Shakespeare's Henry VI. And what that phrase implies is not that the lawyers were the most venal people there. What it implies in the context of that particular play is that the lawyers were the bastions for civil liberty, which is why the ruffians wanted to get rid of them before they forged ahead with their agenda. It's an incredibly important time today to be a lawyer. History is going to look at this period, and history is going to look at the role of lawyers and our legal community in this regard. The choice is ours. Do we want to live our lives in cowardly ignominy, or do we want to do the jobs that we are being trained for?
Ms. Karuna, you really choose your words with care, and your thoughtfully expressed opinions were a delight for the ears. I think it's a skill that all young budding lawyers should learn, to think before you speak. We're indeed grateful that you accepted our invitation and could find time for us from your busy schedule. On behalf of Asian Law College, as a token of our appreciation, we would like to present a memento to you. Thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you very much for your moderation, and thank you to the audience for attending. It's always a joy to engage with law students.